Hello, this is Dan with the with the Veterans for Peace Forum. We have a wonderful poster up here, Girls Who Say Yes to Boys Who Say No. This is a poster, 1968 poster with Joan Baez and her sisters, Pauline and Mimi Farina. It was 1968 when I joined the military, and so it goes back a ways for me. It's a poster that I think is appropriate for tonight's show, as we have a GI Resistor here with us, Chuck Wiley, and I want to say a few things before we get started with the program. I want to talk about an event coming up with Veterans for Peace. We're going to this is Memorial Day weekend, and a lot of people are going to be, having their barbecues and talking about, the war. This is a difficult time for me. There's on a national level, Veterans for Peace is doing called Walk the Wall and delivering letters to the wall from veterans across the country. And this Memorial Day here in Portland, we are going to do an event at the, basically Veterans for Peace wants to invite you to join us for a peace gathering at the World War II Memorial Wall, and this is at the Veterans Memorial Coliseum, or as we used to just call it, the Memorial Coliseum, where they used to have a lot of games. When people came there, that place would be full, the whole street would be full when there were basketball games and everything else. But it's now called the Veterans Memorial Coliseum. It's on 300 North Winning Way, but you will know it. It's right next to the Modem Center and all of those other areas. And we're going to meet at the World War II Memorial Wall. It's just downstairs from the Coliseum. It'll be easy to find. We do this every year. Oftentimes go to the Korean War Memorial. This year we're going to be featuring a speaker, Will Poole, World War II veteran and a member of Veterans for Peace. I've had him on the program in the past, and Will has a wonderful and intelligent mind to tell us about the history of World War II, his participation in joining the military, and the knowledge of what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, etc. They'll have music by Marianne Fleming. She'll be doing soldier songs, and other voices from veterans will come and participate, telling their experiences or remembrances, and they'll be reading Letters to the Wall. Letters to the Wall is a national campaign from Full Disclosure, Vietnam Full Disclosure, which was, they will be walking the wall in Washington, D.C., and they'll walk past the wall to wherever those veterans had served, from what time to what time in Vietnam, and from that point they'll mark how many people had died during that time of period that they were in there, and they'll move on until they want to also include all the victims of Vietnam, and they're going to continue on beyond that. They're also putting up a bell tower, which represents people who have put, it's coming from Asheville, North Carolina, and that bell tower has these little tags across it where people have written in the names of people who died before and after. I have my own tag up there, which is from losing my son as an Agent Orange victim, losing my son when he was 3 years old in 1981. And so his name is up there, and that'll be also part of it. And so I feel very honored that the veterans will have this with hundreds and hundreds of names on there. Then after we finish up there, and we're asking people to get there by about 10:30 a.m., that's when we'll do a brief talk with Will and some music. Then we'll walk from there to the Peace Memorial Park, a park that was founded by Veterans for Peace, just by the Broadway Bridge around that circle, but you can just follow us. We'll walk over there. It's a short distance, and from there we're going to have a featured speaker, Angie Hines. She's a Navy vet, post 9/11 veteran, and she will give her talk, and there'll be more music. So it's a great opportunity to meet Veterans for Peace. And we're not, it's always a difficult thing when we say we're celebrating, or it's an anniversary, or it's a memorial. For me, I found that I was trying to prepare to write a letter to the wall, but it's, for me, it just kind of is a difficult thing because that wall represents so many people that have died, not just our soldiers, but all the victims in the war, the Vietnamese, and those that died after from wounds and Agent Orange and 22 suicides a day, all of these things. And then we don't even talk about, what are we really doing there? I think I just read a little flyer that was posted on Facebook that says, "We honor their deaths by questioning anyone calling for more of them." And I think that's what Veterans for Peace is really about, We wish to honor them by making sure there are no more veterans that are sent to these crazy and insane wars. And we need to find other solutions besides military solutions to our foreign policy. Earlier today, there was also an event at, I think it was at 11 o'clock, it was a march against Monsanto. That was happening also all across the country today. And generally I try to make it to that. I just was unfortunate not to be able to do that. Been partying all week as the end of the season where I work. We had a lot of sort of end of the party. It's like a year-end party. So been having a lot of interesting things. I had some friends in, George Mann, who was in on Wednesday and had a gig at Ranger Station playing folk music, old labor songs, anti-war songs, and joined by other people from General Strike. There was a young woman, Rose Dark, who is a steam fitter, activist, musician. Just great people all come together. Jay Russo, who's with a band called General Strike. So just a great evening, and that chance to go with them afterwards as I met these historical figures that have been singing these songs for years, and they knew people like Pete Seeger, and a number of people that we've all heard their lyrics sung to them, and I feel like honored as they would go around and around with guitar after guitar and sing a song, give a little history about that song and who wrote it. And so it was a good learning thing and a wonderful thing. And then one of my former mentors, a person that got me into VFP, Grant Remington, actually joined us, and he has a band called Loose Change. Plays about every first Thursday at, I can't remember the name of the place, Vita Bohem or something like that. Anyhow, he's you can always go to Veterans for Peace, Chapter 72, and check out what we're doing locally. And if you want more information on the Memorial Coliseum, just check it out, www.vfpchapter72.org. Then after that event, I went to an event with Thomas Lauderdale. He had invited a number of people that work at the Oregon Symphony, musicians and other friends of his, and they had a wonderful party, and he was doing a sing-along, and they were singing old songs. Again, just like this whole folk singing night. It was a lot of fun. But, and when we talk about folk songs, many of these songs were anti-war songs, and it's something that from Bob Dylan to Joan Baez to Pete Seeger and all of these people that inspired a nation of people to question what was going on in Vietnam. But Vietnam is one war. We've had continuous, seems to me, wars, one right after the other. And when I came back from Vietnam in 1969, late 69, there was a startup of another war in Latin America, Central America, and right now there's an anniversary of Oscar Romero, the Archbishop who was assassinated by the El Salvadorian dictatorship at that time. There's a friend of mine here who told me, I met her a few years ago, that she has a daughter who was actually there when that happened, and her daughter was on the church steps when the military came up in their vehicles and drove up the steps and ran over her daughter's arm, took the daughter's arm off, and then went right into the church, plowed into the church doors and opened up with machine gun fire and killed Oscar Romero. We must remember that that was a time in which the U.S. was supporting these dictatorships in Latin America and Central America, and that there was a resistance movement that was very important for people standing up. And for this bishop, who the Catholic Church and many others, generally supported the elites within the country. But through his own, there was a development of a program, a philosophy that was growing among the revolutionaries, among the peasants, and people who were looking for justice, called Christian liberation theology. And I think it had a major effect upon Oscar Romero, as he wasn't a rebel, he was a conservative, but after these nuns who were raped by the military and told to shut up, he couldn't resist the appeal of the masses of his congregation to ask for justice, and that was just too much. So we must remember that it takes an incredible people to say no to the status quo. If you're in the military, which I joined in 1968, and went to Vietnam as a young 19-year-old kid and didn't understand what it meant to be, going to another country, and I thought, that maybe I could do something. I wasn't for war. I don't think I ever had that feeling in me, but I also was looking for some sort of escape, get away from my hometown. I didn't see a future somewhere else. Here today they talk about the poverty draft and a lot of people joining the military for these current wars and I think there was a little bit of that for me. But again, it's hard to say because, at 19 you weren't thinking. It was all confused and their draft was about to happen, and I thought, I'm going to be drafted, I might as well join before they draft me. I hadn't even thought about resistance. I hadn't even thought about going to Canada. I hadn't thought about joining the anti-war movement in any way. I was very ignorant. But once I got to Vietnam, I learned very quickly that this is not a place I wanted to be. I had no hate or fear of these people coming to the United States and attacking us. And I began to understand that right there while we were in battle, it was just to try and survive, and that was it. And I came home and didn't realize that, I had died in Vietnam and am still dying because I have been exposed to Agent Orange, and I have a lot of friends that have died from cancer. I had a child born with congenital heart disease. It's on this day, on Monday, on Memorial Day, that my wife will usually go up to the Veterans Memorial where my son is buried. And I can't even go up there. I mean, it's very hard for me to go up there. It's a difficult thing to remember, but Casey is always in my heart and in my mind, and the war is always there disturbing my sleep, and I always have to worry about my health because of Agent Orange, and as do so many others. So, without further ado here, I want to introduce one of those brave people, Chuck Wiley, who was a chief petty officer in the Navy, and Chuck, I want to thank you first of all for coming here. Also, you were a hometown boy from Frankfort, Kentucky.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about just your growing up in Kentucky, and why did you join the military?
Sure. Well, I was an only child. I mean, Frankfort, Kentucky is only technically my hometown. I actually grew up in a fairly rural area just outside of Frankfort. My dad lived right beside my uncle, so it was kind of out there a little bit. Not what I'd call a really tight-knit community. Family was most of your community. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really anything unusual about my childhood, I don't think. My dad is one of 9 siblings. Almost everyone in his generation had something to do with one war or another. He was the youngest of the 9. His oldest brother was right at 30 years older than him, and had been in World War II And his generation was the Vietnam generation, of course. He ended up not going because of rejection because of a medical condition, and I think that bothered him for quite some time. We didn't have a lot of money. I had a plan to go to college, but the plan was always I'm going to work jobs and pay for college, and that's just going to be it. But at some point along the way, the military just naturally opened up as an option. I guess because my family has so much experience with the military. I have several uncles that have been in the military, several aunts. My grandmother was a nurse in World War II, so it was just always there in the background that the military is a normal part of life and military service is a normal part of life. So there was really no logical leap at all when I decided to go into the Army, which was the first branch of service that I was in. I actually enlisted in the Army in my junior year of high school and did basic training in that summer break between junior and senior years, and everyone else was off doing whatever.
How long were you in the Army?
Just shy of 3 years.
3 years? And that was, you were in military intelligence at that time?
I was in a military intelligence unit, yeah, communications intelligence.
So what did you do when you were in doing that? What was the job, basically?
My job was radio repair. I worked on field radios, jamming equipment, amplifiers, things like that. I was in communications intelligence. The unit that I was in was a signals intelligence platoon, and we
that was what years again?
I first enlisted in December of 1989. And I was with that unit through June of '92. Yeah, June of '92. That was when I transferred to the Navy.
And was that all here in the United States then?
Yeah.
Yeah. And was there communications going on in Latin America and things like that were...
That was right around, when I first went, it was right around the time of Operation Just Cause in Panama to pull Noriega out.
Right.
So it was, to give a little bit of a frame of reference there. There were a lot of operations that were occurring. I never actually left the U.S. to go do any of that sort of stuff, but it was, a lot of involvement just with equipment briefings, things of that nature for people that were going back and forth. There was a lot of traffic into South America.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you left there, did you come back for the United States for a while and then decide to go in the Navy, or did you go directly?
No, what it was, I was working full time, but technically an Army reservist. Even though I was going to work every day for the Army. That was so '92 was right around the time the U.S. Congress started working on military drawdown cutbacks. Things of that nature. The first talk of base closures was starting to come out. So my job and a lot of the other jobs in my units were going back to the normal Army Reserve status, 1 week in a month, things like that. So I was looking at the loss of a paycheck, married at the time, and looking at going from being active duty with benefits to going to work in a factory somewhere or whatever I could find to continue to make ends meet. So I went back to talk to the recruiting office in my hometown, to ask the Army recruiter there specifically, what can I do? He told me that my occupational specialty is 120% overmanned on active duty, so there's no chance of that happening. They're not going to let me go normal active duty. I said I could retrain for any number of specialties that I wanted. I could be a tank driver, or a truck driver, or whatever. None of that really sounded all that appealing to me. The Navy recruiter, one desk over, kind of a small town. They're all in one office together.
He was going like this. Come here.
Yeah, he hears the whole conversation. And, he comes over and says, when'd you take your ASFAB last? What'd you get on it? Let me introduce you to some of the programs I have. And, a couple of months later, I'm leaving for basic training again, and made the transfer. So.
Now, just a little bit of for me, it's thinking about basic training in the Army. It's one thing. It was the Navy. Did you find one easier than the other?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It was I mean, most of the basic training, you break down basic training, what is it really? You know, there's physical conditioning to it.
Right.
There's skills development to it, of course. You know, they teach you how to shoot a rifle, teach you how to wear a uniform, teach you what ranks look like, teach you basic first aid. But you really don't need 2 months to do that, right? If you're talking about 16 hours a day teaching people these things, you don't need 2 months to get through that. But basic training is what it is because of the mental conditioning that takes place.
There you go. That's
right.
Yeah.
So, really, Navy basic. You know, having gone through that mental conditioning process in the Army, Navy basic held nothing for me. I learned everything I needed to learn there in the first 48 hours.
Yeah.
And the rest of it was kind of.
Well, I'm just thinking of, my turn, the minute I got in there, of course, Marine Corps, was like, break people down, turn them into scum, and then try to raise them back up. And half the stuff that were taught to us really was not until our ITR training, which was really weapons. Most of the time we were marching and doing PT, and like you said, conditioning, learning to, what was half the calls was kill, 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 and and all this kind of stuff. So the conditioning to obey orders.
Yes.
It was the main thing, and not to think, to take orders, and that meant, to me, when you think about it, it's almost that fascist sort of thing that happened to the soldiers in Germany. You didn't question people above; you were just supposed to obey orders. But somewhere along the line, people did question orders, and there became, in Vietnam, of course, there was a GI resistance movement. Something that people should check out is a movie called Sir No Sir, which tells an incredible history of veterans of the Vietnam War, something that must and continue to be remembered. If you get an opportunity, you can just go online and say Sir No Sir, Google it, and you'll come up with a way in which you could purchase that DVD and gain an incredible history. It should be taught in every school.
Absolutely.
You were, so you were a nuclear engineer. And what did that mean for you? And you were could you tell us a little bit about where you were stationed and what your job entailed?
Well, so most of my time in the Navy, as you said, I was involved with nuclear engineering. So I dealt with propulsion plants on board ships, either operating them or maintaining them or repairing them when they break, depending on what ship I was on at the time. I served in several commands, but they all had the common theme that, when you're in the engineering department on a ship, especially a large ship, it's really easy just to, I'm kind of ashamed to say it, I guess, but it's easy just to not care what happens outside the ship. It's my bed is fairly deep within the ship. The place I eat is a few feet down the hall, the passageway on the ship, and then the engineering plant, in the belly of the ship. It's easy if you don't have any particular attachment to sunlight to go for months without leaving the skin of the ship while it's underway. Excuse me. So, by and large, for a lot of years in the Navy, I had no concern with where we were going, what we were doing. It was beyond my job description.
Before you go any further, my own curiosity, and so when you say nuclear engineer and the ships, are you saying they're being run by nuclear power?
Yes.
Okay, and there's problems. So you're engineering. So what would happen if were there a number of accidents or problems that were occurring on ship that they needed?
No, not with the actual reactor plants. I mean, it's. Where to start with this?
Yeah.
So there's a number of ships that the U.S. Navy operates. Now they are all aircraft carriers and submarines. There used to be cruisers as well. My first ship was a cruiser that are run by nuclear power plants because a nuclear power plant can give you basically unlimited operational range as far as a ship is concerned. Your only limit is how often you need to bring food on board for the people on the ship to eat. The ship doesn't need to stop and refuel. You can generally, with advances in engineering technology, the nuclear power plants were able to run faster for longer then diesel electric plants. You know, it really it wasn't until the gas turbine plants started to become common that you had battle group ships that could outrun the aircraft carriers, the nuclear aircraft carriers. So the designs of reactor plants are very, very hardy. You know, they're designed to go into fights, designed to get shot at, and the reactors themselves are very well protected deep inside the ship. The problem is the reactor plant itself is very small and a self-contained unit. It feeds power out to other secondary systems. It feeds heat out to a secondary water system that boils that water to turn it to steam, to turn turbines and things like that. And so with all these layers of protection around the reactor core to keep it safe even in a battle, you end up with very complex engineering systems, a whole bunch of secondary and tertiary systems, a lot of redundant systems and things like that, and all of those do break from time to time. Things go wrong with them, and a fairly large staff of people is maintained to make sure that no matter what the ship is doing, the reactors stay within their safety limits, nothing untoward happens. The Navy has its own regulations for how the reactor plants are run, and what the design tolerances are on the reactor cores, and in some ways those mirror the federal requirements that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission puts on civilian plants, and in other ways they're much more restrictive. Primarily because the Navy has an exemption, I guess you could call it, from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's oversight and from the attendant congressional oversight for what their operations are. So, a civilian reactor plant has to request permission from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission every time they want to start up a reactor plant. The Navy doesn't have to do that, and it would be really impossible to maintain any kind of operational secrecy or operational tempo if you had to call back to Washington every time you wanted to start something up. So
but it's in operation all the time, though, isn't it?
Well, sort of. They can be shut down.
Okay.
They can be shut down and cooled down and put in a very low energy state. But yeah, once you start up a reactor plant for the first time, once it goes past its initial criticality, the core never completely shuts down again until it runs out of fuel. But yeah, I mean,
I thought they never ran out of fuel. I thought
they do. It burns out. It burns out. It takes a long, long time compared to a gas tank.
Okay.
Yeah, but they do. The uranium that the core is based on does eventually burn out, and it has to be replaced.
Well, then, what is all this about shelf life? I mean, life millions of years and stuff like that for?
Oh well, the core is running through a process called radioactive fission, right? Whenever the core whenever you fission a uranium atom, it turns into two new elements that are both radioactive themselves. So even though those new elements aren't useful as fuel, they're still radioactive, they're still dangerous to people. And some of the stuff that's produced, once it goes through its decay chains and things like that, that process can take many tens of thousands of years, and in some cases millions of years.
Okay. So what did you do when that fuel was exchanged? And did you have to somebody come and pick that up? What do they do with it?
Yeah, it's done at the special shipyard facilities. There are specialized transports that pick up the fuel and deliver it to long-term core storage facilities.
And where would those be?
They're scattered around. I know there's one that's operated in Idaho. That's where the largest one is. I've heard rumors that the Navy is talking to the folks that run the Yucca Mountain facility, radioactive disposal site, but I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I'm just as a curiosity, I just never really understood that. It's you really helped explain that a little bit to me. So you're on this ship, and something happened that changed the way you said you weren't paying attention to what was going on out there in the world. So what happened?
Well, so the last ship that I was on was an aircraft carrier, and it was the first time that I went back to a ship with the qualifications that I had. The tour before that, I'd been a shore duty instructor and achieve some fairly advanced engineering qualifications that aren't normally assigned to enlisted personnel. So when I returned to sea on the aircraft carrier, I got put back into that watch rotation for the advanced quals I have, called a propulsion plant watch officer on the carrier. It's just somebody who has overall oversight each shift for a particular propulsion plant on the ship. So on the Enterprise, for instance, you're overseeing about 30 watchstanders that are running a particular propulsion plant. That watch station is normally reserved for commissioned officers. There were a few of us that were qualified. I was the only one that was qualified to stand the watch on that particular ship at that particular time that did not already have advanced air warfare qualification for the carrier and stuff like that. So this was my first tour on an aircraft carrier. And those are just qualifications that everyone at some point, if they stay with the Navy long enough, goes through in order to familiarize themselves with operations, how the ship does what it does, what its particular mission is, and so forth. So I was a Chief Petty Officer at the time on an aircraft carrier without air warfare qualification, so that was something that needed to happen if I was going to go anywhere with my career. The problem, I guess, like yourself, as you said of yourself a few minutes ago, I was never really an out-and-out pro-war type of person. I was never really what I would consider a bloodthirsty individual. Yeah. I did have an outlook, though, that sometimes war is necessary. Sometimes, I felt when I first went into the military that the United States got dragged into wars. It didn't initiate them. We get dragged into them, and people make us go fight. But when somebody crosses that line and forces us into a corner, we're going to respond. We're going to respond decisively and effectively, and make sure that doesn't happen again. That was the viewpoint that I had when I first went into the military, and I held it for a lot of years. I had an awareness, I think, when I first showed up on the Enterprise, and it was post 9/11. It was early 2004 when that happened. I had an awareness of what was going on, the types of things that we were being told as a nation after 9/11, and with the initial invasion, or I guess a second invasion into Iraq in 2003. I knew we weren't being told the whole truth. I feel like I knew that then, but it wasn't important then, right? The whole truth wasn't. I kind of had this viewpoint: the whole truth isn't being told because the whole truth is simply too complicated for people to grasp. So
let's just put our trust in our leaders. They know what they're doing.
Exactly.
Right? That's kind of what a lot of people said, actually. They says, look, you don't have the knowledge and the intelligence that these people do. I mean, they wouldn't betray us, I mean, and that I think that most people want to trust their government, their leaders. They elected them and put them into office, and
absolutely.
And so they have the best interests of the nation at hand, but not always true.
Yeah, we'd like to think that.
Yeah.
But I guess the really short version is. In the course of that qualification, and standing watches in departments that weren't my department, spending a lot of time in the Combat Direction Center, watching actual missions play out, standing in a room full of people that had been indoctrinated to this sort of behavior and had seen this stuff for years, and it wasn't abnormal to them anymore. It was kind of a culture shock to me. I honestly didn't understand. I didn't get it. I'd recently been promoted to Chief Petty Officer, so I'd gone through a lot of, I'd gone through a lot of fresh classwork on international obligations, Geneva Conventions, rights of soldiers and sailors, things of that nature. And standing there watching these missions unfold, the thought that kept resounding in my skull was that this doesn't match up with what I understand about the conventions. This doesn't match up with what I understand about international law. And a specific example is strike missions that we were conducting against empty apartment blocks. Civilian infrastructure that wasn't in use. The people that lived there had moved on because it was in the middle of an active combat zone. Our own intelligence on these buildings said they were empty. There's nobody there. And the reason that we were leveling these buildings is to stop any potential future occupation by enemy forces. The logic was we don't want to have to look behind us and worry that the insurgents have come into these buildings behind us and started using them as headquarters. The problem is a fear that the enemy might one day occupy that site doesn't exempt it from the requirements of the Geneva Conventions. It just flies in the face of what the requirements are. And as far as I knew, we were still a signatory to the conventions. We were still bound by the conventions, and we were still the good guys upholding the conventions. And yet, here we were bombing apartment building after apartment building. And in some cases, based on intelligence that was weeks old. In a city, in a country where I think at the time upwards of 20% and growing of the population was transient in some nature, had been internally displaced,
Right.
or whatever.
Ended up being some 4 million refugees and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
There's a lot of people.
So when you say about international law and bombing apartments, why was that a violation against the Geneva Convention?
Well, the Geneva Conventions, I believe it's the fourth convention, requires you to protect civilian infrastructure from damage of the war as much as possible. So power systems, hospitals, schools, places for people to live. You're only allowed to go after those sorts of infrastructure that civilians are going to need to rebuild their lives after the war is over if they have been specifically turned into a military target.
Right.
So you can't bomb a hospital, because you have the fear that enemy troops may be using the medical facilities in there. That doesn't allow you to bomb the hospital. If your enemy places an anti-aircraft emplacement on the hospital's roof, now the hospital's a legal target under the conventions. But nothing had been done there. It was just an empty apartment building, and we were destroying them just to deny their potential future use.
We're saying this very same thing about ISIS now. That they're going in and destroying everything in its wake, and we're condemning them using those conventions and as an excuse to go for another humanitarian effort. Right? And here we were doing that.
Yep.
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you brought that up. That's important for people to know and understand. There's just as a reference here, I have a book called "Crimes of War: What the Public Should Know." This has sort of a history of war crimes, and it's a good book to kind of review. There was just something I was reading here on. It was by the International Red Cross, was doing a lot of advising on the Gulf War, and they were talking about the Bush administration actually coming to them. Schwarzkopf actually was coming to them and asking them, what can we do to make sure we don't violate any of these things? And they would go back and over again until they finally said, wait a minute, we're not going to be your legal excuse to start a war. I thought that was pretty interesting, but you can get a lot more information from that. There's another book, a magazine I just picked up. You can get a history of I think the Nation 150th anniversary. There's stuff on the Gulf War, the Vietnam War, and of course a lot of other things that are going on in our society dealing with the economy. It's a great book just to kind of review history in a very brief and general way, but a great magazine, a great historical resource. I also, like I said, as a Vietnam veteran, I picked up this book here the other day at Powell's. It's called 10 Years After the Vietnam Today, and it's basically a photo book on Vietnam by Tim Page. If you get a chance to pick up something like that and give you some bit of history, I thought it was incredible because there's a picture of let's see if I can find it in here real quick. This bombed out church here to the I don't know if it's my right, your left, is a place that in Quang Tri, where I was stationed in Vietnam, and I just found this the other day, and it's amazing because that's where I would sleep in that church as rats would kind of crawl over us at night. And then I couldn't stand being in there anymore. The roof wasn't even on it. It was a bombed out church. And then on the side I would sleep with just a poncho over me, and the monsoons came and slept in mud puddles, you know. But it reminded me, I want to go back and see that church and see, you know, the people that lived around there, because there was just a village across the street which I never went to, but it was a place from where we humped into the jungle to go on these search and destroy missions, and again, that's why I say Memorial Day brings back a lot of memories, and it's a constant search for my soul. I believe I had some humanity that was still left with me there, but war does take a lot of humanity out of you because you're ignoring the question of human life. And somewhere along the road back to civilization, we have to remember that we are human beings, and that the people that we're dealing with in other countries, why we have to continue to ask the question, why are we at war? Why did they send us there? What are they really after? Are they a real threat to us, you know? Or are we creating a disaster, and we're creating enemies? I've been back to Vietnam once in 2006, and it's a city that's continually growing. This great fear of communism and the domino theory that this was going to all just fall into one communist country after another. Well, I think last show we had Dal Strom, who is a Vietnamese young woman who is an artist, singer, and she was one of those refugee children that came to the United States. Her parents were South Vietnamese. Her father was in a refugee camp, re-education camp. He was a writer, and he stayed in Vietnam when they came here. He thought he could contribute even while he was there, but he was put in a re-education camp and tortured. There's no good guys on either side. When war happens, people do bad things. They take revenge on the enemy, and it's not right. But I also know that there's no excuse saying that they're any better or worse, because I knew a Vietnamese woman who was captured by the South Vietnamese, who was put in tiger cages that were invented by the French while they were there, and imprisoned her for 7 years, 4 of which she was, at the end of 4 years, was going to be released. That all she had to do was bow down to the South Vietnamese flag. But she refused, and they put her back in the tiger cages, hung her by her thumbs. Terrible thing. And she survived all of that. And yet, she is a woman who is forgiving of the war, and realized that, individual people, the soldiers, 19-year-olds and 16-year-olds and everybody else that believed in their country fought because their leaders sent them there. And I think we all have to remember that these men and women who fight in these countries, whether they're aware or not, we can't just say that we honor them. Thank you for your service. Kind of bothers me in a sense, because what are you thanking them for? Invading another country, using military aggression, killing innocent women and children are being killed in these countries. I mean, I think you have to understand that. But I think we have to recognize they are not the ones that started it. They are not the ones that called for the war. They are people who, like anybody else, just wants to go on with their lives, be able to provide for their families, and that's people on all sides in any country. So that's important. And I think what happens to, we got Chuck here who realized something while he was in the service. I started to realize a little bit about that, and started resisting in a different way, by not being a full participant. There's different ways of slowing down and beginning to question these things. So this mission that you're talking about, you called it, what was it, Mission Presence?
Yeah, it was slightly. It was another thing that we were doing. It was, but sort of in the same vein, the presence missions. Yeah. So there was a. Well, you're familiar with Fallujah.
Yes.
Okay. So,
yes.
so after the assault on Fallujah, the U.S. came under a lot of international scrutiny. There was a lot of backlash from the international community about what we did there. And it all started trying to chase down the perpetrators of some executions that were visited upon some U.S. contractors. Which I think after the fact, years later, we find out that the contractors that were dragged out of their car were Blackwater contractors.
Right.
So we may never know what the full story behind that actually was. But it became clear that that sort of response wouldn't be tolerated again. A lot of international support for the war would be lost if we made that the status quo. So I guess the plan was hatched that from that point forward, if they needed to flush someone of interest out of a civilian population, then they would use this sort of combined tactic of blocking off roads and accesses to a town or a village or whatever, the most likely routes people would use to escape, and then simply give them something to escape. And the tool of choice for doing that was F-18s, from U.S. carriers. I mean, understand that, by this point in the middle of the second Iraq invasion, there are people well into adulthood that live in that country that have never known life without an American warplane overhead.
That's right.
A lot of these people probably know and can identify the different models of an American F-18 better than anyone that doesn't actually work on them every day. I wouldn't doubt they know their ordnance payloads quite well, know which ones carry what munitions and so forth. So they know full well what an American fighter pilot coming in for a low-level pass over, below cloud cover over a town means. And they don't stick around waiting for bombs to actually fall. And we know that, and the presence missions were designed to take advantage of that. It was a concerted attempt to terrorize people into packing their stuff into their car and getting out of town. And once you have them on the roads trying to get away, it's much easier to slow them down, stop them, pick through them, find the people that you want, and let everybody go back about their lives. I mean, that I guess was the somewhat naive interpretation of how that was going to go down. The way it ended up actually playing out was the decision at some point was made that we need to do this at dawn or at dusk because the fighter planes will be less at risk then because they'll be harder to target, for ground fire because they're going to be flying low enough. They're well in range of ground fire, which was, how I originally found out that the publicly released version of what these planes were doing wasn't entirely accurate. Because one of them got heavily damaged by ground fire on a mission that, up until that point, my understanding was he was far too high for anyone with a handheld weapon to hit him. But the way this ends up playing out is, early morning passes of jet aircraft at high speed over a populated area. It gets people moving on a road and driving at a fairly high rate of speed because they're afraid they're going to get hit by a bomb, straight toward a roadblock that's manned by people exactly like what you were talking about. People who are 18, 19, maybe 20 years old. with automatic weapons. I'm sure meaning well, but not a whole lot of life experience under their belt for how to make decisions in this kind of environment. And you put them on a road in poor lighting conditions, you know, with a column of cars bearing down on them with orders to stop them by any means necessary. It's not going to stay peaceful for very long, and it never did. It's, you know, you're one bad decision away from a massacre. It was just setting up the conditions for it. To me, it just looked like deliberate intimidation. I mean, that was a definition that fit every definition I ever heard of terrorism. Mm-hmm. That's what it was. It was a tactic deliberately designed to instill fear in a population.
Right.
And it chilled my blood. I had no idea what to think of that.
So you went to higher ups and saying you didn't want to participate in this anymore?
I would love to sit here and be able to tell you that's what I did.
Yeah.
It's not.
Let's tell us what you did.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what happened was my first response was just asking people to tell me how this is legal. Mm-hmm. Right? Tell me what I'm missing. Fill in the blanks for me. This is my understanding of the conventions. This is my understanding of the UN Charter. This is what I see us doing. I don't understand how these two things fit together. So just fill in the gaps for me. Tell me what we did to make this legal, because I don't get it.
He just told you to shut up?
Yeah. I mean, it was the only response I got was, that's not your problem. It in no way, shape, or form fits your job description.
Obey orders.
Yeah. So do your job. You know, no person in the Navy has ever faced a court-martial for obeying the captain's orders. Like, my question wasn't, am I going to be court-martialed? My question was, how is this legal?
Right.
So that's, I mean, you know, to save a lot of the grimy details, that got ever more confrontational until the point where I had been removed from my leadership position. I was no longer in charge of a division. I was writing tests at the end of that deployment in a training division. You know, I had requested a transfer off the ship. I didn't feel like I was going to get any sort of fair play from my chain of command anymore. To my surprise, my chain of command agreed and also recommended I be transferred off the ship. And in that transfer, I asked for orders to any ship not participating in the war in the Middle East, which at the time was half the fleet that I was qualified to go to. You know, fully half the fleet wasn't engaged in what was going on in the Middle East. So it seemed to me to be a pretty easy request for the Navy to grant. I instead got sent to a ship that was redeploying to Iraq in 4 months. So I took that as a slap in the face. Talked to Navy Legal about what my options were for conscientious objector status. They made it very clear that I don't qualify. You know, we sat down, we looked at what the actual definition in the U.S. military of a conscientious objector is, and at the time, you know, if I'm honest, yeah, they were right. I don't qualify. I mean, it's a very restrictive definition, but I didn't qualify for it. I was not against all forms of warfare. I was not against all forms of violence. I was dead set against this particular war. I felt like it was launched illegally. I felt like the things that we were doing were violations of the Geneva Conventions. I felt like we were victimizing people that had done nothing wrong except live too close to a resource that we wanted.
So those are great reasons to say, no, I don't want to participate in this anymore. Now, we're running out of time here because I want to get to you going to Canada. So it was in 2007 you went to Canada?
February 2007.
February 2007.
Yeah.
So when you went there, you applied for asylum, refugee status there. I think people need to know that people who are fleeing from war or fear of persecution have a right by international law to apply for asylum in another country. And if you were under fear of being arrested and then put in the stockade for refusing orders, and therefore took your position to go to Canada.
Yes.
But we had was different than it was in the Vietnam War. We had a lot of people accepted into Canada for asylum, but under this new conservative government with under Stephen Harper, he put a very strong resistance to resistors coming in there, and was talking about deportation. So you were living under this fear of deportation. How long were you in Canada?
Just shy of 8 years.
8 years.
February 2007 I went, and I returned to the U.S. in January of this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how I first met you.
Yeah.
Coming here.
Yep.
So what was it like in Canada, just under those conditions?
It was a very long, drawn-out fight. I mean, it was kind of an odd situation. Well, I guess I can't really call it that odd. It's sort of the same situation that we have here in the U.S. with a lot of different issues right now. From the moment that I went there, and understand that I went to Canada 3 years after this fight had started. There were people that got there 3 years ahead of me on the same sort of grounds, right? They had the same sorts of problems. They applied for the same process when they got to Canada. So this fight was well underway, and the Canadian population was really aware of it. And there have been a lot of polls conducted, one by a company called Stratcom, which is a very well-respected public polling firm in Canada. They do a lot of political polling. They came back with majority support across the board, even across all voting blocks.
To support the veterans.
Supporting us being allowed to remain in Canada.
Yeah. I remember those, yeah.
Yep. And even it was a slim majority, but even a majority of conservative voters wanted us to be able to stay. And by that time, of course, Stephen Harper's a prime minister. The first interference that actually occurred with a U.S. conscientious objector that went to Canada occurred under the previous Liberal government of Paul Martin, but they were just very hands-off. We're not sure if we want to do this. So they stopped it and kind of held back. It wasn't until the Conservatives got in power that they really came after us, regardless of what the voters wanted.
Yeah, it's not easy just to take off and go to Canada anymore. It used to be you could just go across, like your driver's license. Now you need your passport to go across. I remember I went through Canada to go to Cuba, and it was very strange that our government stopping us from going through. But when I went there, it was actually the Canadian government was very open arms. And that's
a different world now.
Yeah, it's a different world now. Very interesting. We got about 2 minutes left here. So you under that deportation. We got to wrap up. I'm sorry. We're gonna have to have you back. That's what we're gonna do to talk about Canada, and we'd like to do more of that. I just want to again tell people that you want to find out more. Go to Courage to Resist.